Hi, my name is PR Griffis, and my current event presentation is on a New York Times guest essay called The Troubling Trend in Teenage Sex. So I first thought that I might talk about the pro-Palestinian protests on university campuses, especially with regard to those that are using free speech and nonviolent protest to try to raise awareness and get people to divest, which is not going well, and the use of police at the college, city, and state level to quell those protests. And although I'm not going to cover that, the piece by Zadie Smith that came out today in the New Yorker is well worth a read on this topic. But it seemed, I don't know, to cover the student protests without covering in depth what they are protesting just didn't seem right. And the issue is so massive that it too didn't feel like it was the right size for this presentation. Then I thought I might cover Harvey Weinstein's New York conviction for sexual abuse, the overturn of that, but I didn't see a clear social work angle in that necessarily. So what I did land on was this opinion guest essay by Peggy Ornstein called The Troubling Trend in Teenage Sex, in which she discusses the research of Dr. Debbie Herbennick, who over the course of the last 4 years, she's been looking at the rise of rough sex among college students, particularly sexual strangulation, or what is colloquially referred to as choking. 2/3 of women in her most recent campus representative survey of 5,000 students at an anonymized major Midwestern university said a partner had choked them during sex, 1/3 in their most recent encounter. And the rate of those women who said that they were between the ages of 12 and 17 the first time that happened had shot up to 40% from 1/4. So in Mrs. Ornstein's work, she looks and says she asked at a high school, a 16-year-old girl said, "How come all boys want to choke you?" And in a different class, a 15-year-old boy wanted to know, why do all girls want to be choked? And as the article goes on, there's a good bit of discussion about where this trend may be coming from. Obviously 50 Shades of Grey, pornography, etc. She goes on to discuss the physical, cognitive, and psychological impacts of sexual choking, and says they're disturbing. And she says, too, the idea that when women's social, economic, and educational political power are in ascent, when Me Too has made progress against harassment and assault, there has been the popularization of a sex act that can damage women's brains, impair intellectual functioning, undermine mental health, even kill them. Non-fatal strangulation, she says, is one of the most significant indicators that a man will murder his female partner. And yet it's somehow been eroticized and made consensual. And I think there's a lot here that touches on areas that may be pertinent to our various practices, once we're out there. So BDSM, bondage, discipline, sadomasochism, film, television, and other media, and the way that BDSM is portrayed, the way sex is portrayed for that matter. Consent, which, is a fundamental component of BDSM, which somehow gets left out a lot of times in media portrayals. Safer sex, again, with film, television, and other media, we don't see as often safer sex practices generally. Apps and hookup culture are informing all of this, and receptive partners, role expectations, and power dynamics. And I say receptive partners because Ornstein talks about it in terms of men and women, and I think that it's more inclusive to talk about it in terms of receptive partners as opposed to active partners, role expectations of receptive partners, and power dynamics, power differentials, and the way that those can be exploited in a non-healthy way. And so Ornstein wrote a bit back now another piece called "When Did Porn Become Sex Ed?" Which I think it's an interesting phrasing, and I think a better one would be, in what context did porn become sex ed? So I came across this website called seekus.org that does this really comprehensive job of looking at the sex education that is offered to students by state and gives them a grade. So, Texas, Louisiana, wasn't super surprised. Was more surprised by the Northeast, New York. And it allows you to select and then look at the state specifics and see what is taught, what isn't taught. One of the things that I found really interesting was that it also allows you to look at the legislation, the state landscape. Additionally, it shows, for instance, what is required to be taught, what isn't required to be taught. I was surprised to find out that in New York State, for instance, they are required to stress abstinence. And it's just a really worthwhile website, I think, if you're trying to learn more about what kids are being taught and what is required to be taught by state. And Ornstein notes that while there's lots of good educational materials out there regarding BDSM and the safe practice of it, pretty much, any teacher who attempted to introduce that curriculum in any state in the U.S. would almost certainly lose their job. You're not going to, in the same way that maybe they have the banana that you learn to put a condom on, they're not going to, have you practice safe choking. However, there are some really important underlying principles that aren't being taught, such as consent and bodily autonomy. Growing up in the South, you had to hug and kiss people because they wanted you to, whether or not you wanted to. And it was really revolutionary to me learning about friends who'd grown up in other parts of the country who were like, "Oh, no, my mom didn't make me do that. That wasn't part of where I grew up." Exploring the role of film, television, and other media, and being able to tell kids like, "Hey, what we see on TV isn't real," and being able to deconstruct that with them. Gender expression and diversity. Not just, there are gay kids and there are straight kids. Some people like boys, some people like girls, some people like both. But to be able to tell them, like, some people feel romantic towards some, and some people don't feel romantic towards any. And safer sex, which, is a pernicious sell in a lot of states because they focus so heavily on abstinence only. Absent hookup culture. The number of adult gay men that I know who, were on Grindr at 15 and 16. In the same way that with safer sex and with BDSM, and Orenstein noting that, the first time girls had been choked was 14 to 17. In that same way, trying to navigate what they already know in a healthy manner. And again, receptive partners, active partners, role expectations, power dynamics, all of this coming together to not just teach kids about safe sex, but about their bodies, about consent, is really something that I think is missing. And just for fun, this little educational bit, with apologies, F-bombs, this was the version that I found.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they
And I think there are some really important considerations here around consent, around power differentials and the exploitation of those. We're back to Weinstein again. And Louis C.K., who, after staunchly denying that anything had happened, then said, okay, yeah, it did. Aziz Ansari, former president before that, and back to the campus. For those of you who remember, Brock Turner, UCLA swimmer who sexually assaulted a woman and then had his parents saying, how rough his life was going to be and how his appetite was gone, and it just happened the one time, and it would be a tragedy to ruin his life, which of course does not take into account the impact of his actions on the woman whom he sexually assaulted. And when we talk about power differentials, we're back to student protests and how even if you are nonviolently protesting, you may find yourself the target of university, city, or state police violence. And here we are back again in Gaza. So the questions that I want to ask you, first, what factors impact sexual experience and understanding in teens and young adults? And what protective factors might be introduced to make this a healthier area of exploration and growth for them? And two, what other areas that touch on social policy are informed by such topics as consent, power imbalances and abuse, and lack of communication. And 3, at the level and area of social work you hope to practice, whether that be state, federal policy, working with an agency, schools, private practice, or others, what do you anticipate needing to know to be effective with regard to the topics above? And there are my sources. Thank you very much for your time. Take care.